What's in store for commodities for 2025? Base metals in particular, the driving blocks of our society, of every economy. Will it predict a recession or economic growth? Will prices for the base metals lead inflation? We'll talk about these very important topics with our guest today, Ian Harris. He's the CEO of Libero Copper, a company that just announced some recent drill results. We'll talk about that. Ian, thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for sponsoring this interview. Welcome back. Happy 2025.
Yeah, thanks, David, and happy New Year, and look forward to 2025.
Let's start by talking about an overview of the base metals market in 2024. I'm going to use copper as an example, not just because your company is called Libero Copper, but because copper is known as Dr. Copper. It's been perceived as a leading indicator for economic growth for as long as people can remember. And we'll evaluate the health of the sector last year before we make any predictions for 2025. If you look at my screen here, this is the copper chart. In 2024, we can see that it's had a bit of a pullback since its top in May 2024, and it had a huge run up until May. Walk us through, just give us a recent history lesson here. Walk us through why the base metals did so well in the first half of the year and why things started to break down in the second half.
Yeah, I think we've had this conversation before. Metals pricing is always a fight between short-term, medium-term, and long-term underlying reasoning, right? And I think, early in the year, it was we need base metals, energy transition, AI, all this pent up demand. There's not enough investment. That was the conversation, right?
Hmm.
But then around May, there were some significant concerns over the world economy and the economy specifically of China. And that's when we saw I think it was really a head fake because some of the indicators didn't jive, right? That China increased its export of copper dramatically when it actually consumes the majority. I think it was a false indicator. I think that smelters continue to be extremely tight in their supply of concentrate. But it was the conversation, and the world became very concerned about the economy. Perhaps the US elections also pushed that narrative inflation, the economy, everything stinks, everything's bad, right? And that was the narrative, right? And I think that was the real catalyst, right? And so again, it's whatever, is it a short-term focus, a medium-term focus, or a long-term focus that really drives what the price of a day is?
Are you surprised that after the Trump win, the price of base metals, in particular copper, did not rally significantly on the news, uh, given that one would assume that pro-growth policies, if you can call them pro-growth policies, would be bullish for base metals because we're essentially inducing demand.
Yeah, I mean, and look at the day of elections. You can kind of see it. There was a big down red, and then it bounced right back up on green, and then it went down, 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 down. So it was almost like people were trying to figure it out. So if the world's best were trying to understand, but I think this is my opinion, right? I think what won the money pool, like where did money go? It went into crypto. Unfortunately, I'm not a big fan of crypto, but that's where it went. This is the same time you saw Bitcoin rallying to over 100,000, and significant money was flowing into crypto's currencies. I was surprised, right, that there was so much support from the president in crypto, considering it doesn't really do much for your economy. But I think there's a lot of very rich people that help put them into elections. Either way, I think it's because it's where the money was flowing, and it had been flowing into crypto, right? And then around Christmas time, we saw a rebalancing, right? And we're seeing it kind of shake out and move sideways again. And I think leading into what's going to happen in 2025.
It was interesting because throughout the year there was somewhat of a relationship between copper and the S&P 500. This relationship started to diverge as of the end of September after the Fed started cutting rates. What do you make of copper versus stocks overall?
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? I don't know why it's diverging. I think the only thing that you could say is where does money flowing to, and people are having a shorter term focus. They see a lot of money being made in technology stocks and cryptos, blockchain, et cetera, et cetera.
Let's
There's
put
a
it this way,
rally
Ian.
there, so it moves into that.
Which of these data sets do you think is a better indicator of the real economy right now?
I don't think either is right. I think that
Okay.
it's wrong, right? That's what's my point. I wouldn't mind looking at the same chart. I've never looked at it, but I wouldn't mind looking at the
Mhm.
chart of copper price, maybe at the start of August, right? And between it and Bitcoin, right? And I think that would be the opposite relationship, right?
Let's take a
Then you could
look.
also
That's
see
interesting.
there was
Yeah.
a divergence that was there, and then it came back to see, and then you see this big run, right? And it's an opposite correlation starting in around October time period, right? And I think that's just the flow of money,
Okay.
right? I think we are going to come back to reality and fundamentals in 2025.
What does that mean? Come back to reality. What does that mean for the markets?
Well, there's something that I've been, I've been on many think tanks about this, and supply demand guys, they have about a 2 year vision, right? And as a mining guy, we have like 10 year, 20 year visions, right? And so people see, they don't feel the pain yet, right? And there's not new supply coming on. If there is any sort of fight over tariffs and production, I think China uh, saying I'm not going to export antimony anymore, right? Oh, my rare earths. Wait a second, I'm not going to do that anymore. I think
Yeah.
those are like warning shots across the bow, right? The real big bullet is I'm not going to sell you copper. Oh, you want to build electric vehicles? I'm not going to sell you electric motors. I'm
Hmm.
just going to sell you electric vehicles. And I almost sometimes think that China is sitting on the other side of the table going, why don't they get this? Why don't they understand? Like we shot them across the bow, but they're not getting it, right?
Yeah.
But you have seen the opposite reaction, right? You have an antimony mine being approved in the United States. You have Trump coming out and say, if you're willing to invest $1 billion, approvals are not a problem, right? I am going to fast track approvals, right? So I think that there's a lot, at least enough intelligence around him, right? And I think even Elon Musk realizes, right, the
Hmm.
only way he's going to save his business is if he has access to supply chains. And so I think that is what's going to come out to play in 2025. We need more production. And that is only stimulated by higher equity prices and higher metals prices.
I want to come back to your outlook for the copper and the base metals complex in just a minute. Give us an outlook for 2025. But first, I'm curious to see what happened to the GDX today. I'm using the GDX as a proxy for miners. I know it's a gold miners index, but not a lot of movement on the day. I bring that up because just today on Monday, Justin Trudeau officially announced his resignation. I mean, he's not out of Parliament yet. There's going to be a transition period, of course. I intend to resign as party leader and as prime minister after the party selects a new leader. The Canadian dollar moved up on the news. I wonder what's next for the mining sector. I know your project is based in South America, but you and I are both Canadian. Resources are, one of the main sectors or industries of Canada. What's going to change now?
Yeah, it's hard to predict, but we had a quick conversation earlier, right? That I don't think that Trudeau was healthy to the overall equities market of Canada, and Canada is heavily weighted in the resource sector. You see Australia on fire, right? The Australian exchange is on fire right now in natural resource equities. So I would guess that politics is always a swing of the pendulum. So it's got to get better, right? I think that Canada needs a strong equities markets, and that is what's probably the most important thing. So
What
fingers crossed. We don't know what's going to happen, but I would assume that it's got to get better.
Put it this way, what policy changes would you like to see enacted by the next administration, whether that be the Conservatives winning the next election or another liberal majority? Who knows? But what changes would you like to see?
Well, I think we saw a lot of changes, and again, I'm not a tax expert, but we saw differences. There's some stimulus due to credits for investment and exploration, but there was more and more rights pushed towards indigenous nations, which I don't think is a bad thing, but the lack of clarity was a huge thing, right? The lack of clarity gives a hit. Capital gains taxes, all sorts of uncertainty around metals investment. What you see in Australia, what I would love to see is, these national government funds for retirement having to invest in Canada, right? I mean, like, why not force that they have to that they can't be buying 90% of BlackRock mutual funds, right?
Hmm.
That they have to invest in Canada. And that would spur, bringing back one of the real gems of Canada. There was a time where Canada, I think investment in exploration was between 50 to 75% of the world's exploration dollars in junior mining came out of Canada, right? And so that is a huge opportunity,
There's a lot
right?
of
To
investors.
get back that.
There's a lot of investors right now interested in the North American resource sector, and of course, Canada is a big component of the North American resource sector. It's no surprise. Well, are you surprised that many North American companies, in gold in particular, again, I'm using gold as an example. I know you're a copper company. Gold in particular underperformed Australian counterparts. There's many reasons for why this may be. What's your take on this?
Yeah, there is no doubt that we have underperformed versus Australian equities. I don't know if it's because that's a leading indicator and we're a lagging indicator, or it's a policy. But it appears to me that Australia, I think probably two things, right? They did a better job. They were more disciplined with their companies in the last bull cycles, right? So there's more trust in Australian companies, right? So rebuilding trust is critical. But I think the other part is legislation that focuses on investment in Australia, right? I think that is a big component. I think the big retirement funds have to invest in Australia, and I think that would be very helpful in Canada.
Is that a policy thing that Canadian funds don't invest in, or not heavily invested in mining companies, or is that just a fund
I think
specific?
it's in the Canadian exchanges, period, right? I don't
Right.
think that they have any mandate that a certain percentage of the fund must be invested in Canadian markets.
Okay. Certainly, we can look forward to maybe that changing. But what needs to happen to bring capital back into North America in the resource sector? I mentioned, changing of the guard in Parliament in Canada. Is that it?
I like to look at fundamental errors in what we have done, right? As a sector, I talk a lot about the very dark night of low profile, right? That was a massive error by the industry for many, many decades. That we just said keep a low profile, nobody will bother you, and we basically allowed others to villainize
Sorry.
the
What do you
industry
mean?
because
What do
we
you mean
didn't have
low?
a voice.
What do you mean low profile?
Well, I've been working in the industry long enough that in the beginning, the idea was just keep a low profile, don't raise your head, just get
Mm,
your work done, go out and explore, don't make a lot of noise, don't do interviews, don't get on the news,
right.
don't show your face, don't cause the antibodies, right? And all we did was allowed NGOs to fill that space, right?
Yeah.
And so now we're on our back legs and we've been villainized. This doesn't make any sense. This isn't fair. But it's too late because we allowed somebody else to fill in that brand, right? But I think the other one is right. We have focused on mining investors, and it's the same mining investors, and it's mining investors, and it's mining investors, and they're getting older and older and older and older, and they're completely different than a new wave of investors, right? So I think something has to be done. Maybe it happens organically that people go, well, I like Bitcoin and I'll want a little less risk. And no, but mining seems to have some parallels and there's some attraction there.
Hmm.
Regulations and crypto versus regulations and mining stock is completely different. But there's got to be an attraction of that capital, and that is an explosive capital. It's capital gets deployed fast, it moves fast. It doesn't make any sense that George the Duck Bitcoin can have a $30 billion valuation overnight, right? But there has to be a reach out to those same people. Maybe it's because it's access. Maybe it's easier. Maybe because they understand social media better. But there has to have a new generation of investors come into the sector, or it's going to happen naturally because we're not just going to have enough production and prices are going to go through the roof. I mean, Friedland would say you're going to need a telescope to be able to see the price of copper,
Sure.
right? Because there's just not enough production, right? I also believe, and I'm sorry if I'm getting long-winded, that copper has been the metal that's cried wolf, right? Every year it grows 3%, and every year production grows 3%. And everybody says, oh, there's going to be peak copper, there's going to be peak copper. But every year more production came, but it came through technology, through acid leaching of oxides. It came through bigger and bigger and bigger trucks. But we're limited on how much more we can squeeze out of the existing projects. But people are like, yeah, but I've heard that story before. So that's another problem that's overall in the sector. The sector has met and has heard this story before, but I really think it's playing out. I think you see it playing out in copper, I see it playing out in oil, and you see it in other commodities. It's finally playing out.
Well, let's take a look at copper versus some of the other metals and just compare the stories before we talk about your overall thesis for 2025. Here's a copper chart. I'm going to overlay this with silver. I'll overlay this with gold. Silver is up about 29%, 30% over the last 12 months, 1 year, and so is gold. Roughly same performance. Copper has done not too badly, up 9%, but underperforming some of the other metals. Now, I know that copper has different use cases, of course, than gold, so it's not fair to compare. We're not really comparing apples to apples here, but people invested in copper are also mostly also familiar with the gold and silver spaces. So walk us through why gold and silver did better than copper in 2024.
Well, I mean, I think it's evident. Well, the more interesting one is where you see a split back in May between silver price and gold price,
Yes.
right? Because people were saying, is it an industrial metal or is it a precious metal, right? Is it a hedge to fiat currencies? Is it a hedge to inflation? Is it an insurance? Is it whatever the logic is? And then it came back and tied back in, right? It caught back up, right? And now it's tied back up with gold. So, I mean, the biggest difference is that copper is an industrial metal, and it's called Dr. Copper for a reason. And so I think there was much more, and you could really see it. Maybe it was just propaganda, right? That the sky is falling, the sky is falling, and people had some serious concerns over the economy of China, the world economy, the U.S. economy. And maybe a part of that is elections, et cetera, et cetera. See in September, bets are off. People think Trump's coming in, and then again a surprise. So I think that it is highly tied to today. It's tied to the health of the world economy, right? But it's also based on an old narrative that copper production would always be there when there was required demand, right? So it's a question: when do those wheels fall off? Right? When do we not have enough copper, right? And because it's a complex supply chain, even problems within the supply chain, right? I like telling people about uranium, where uranium prices went through the roof, right? And some valuations of equities made absolutely no sense. You said they have like 100,000 years of resource in that mine, right? So why would you value all their resource based on today's uranium prices? But that's what happens in those kind of situations where you get a physical squeeze and everybody starts panicking. Microsoft or Google opening up a checkbook and buying, going from a nuclear power plant and then looking at copper mines or copper companies, is a completely different reality that we have not experienced in the past.
This kind of corresponds to your narrative of the economy slowing down and people are, propagating this sky is falling narrative. You're naturally going to navigate towards a safe haven like gold and then probably short an industrial commodity like copper, right? So I'm just
That is
wondering if
correct.
copper going down is signaling more weakness to come in the global economy, more of a slowdown, shall we say?
I think that it's still playing out. And I think it's the flow of money. You have to see where that money is flowing. What's going to happen? There's so much money flowing into crypto. Some might would say, or I wouldn't say, right? Eventually, the Ponzi scheme has to collapse, right?
Mm.
There are not enough new investors, right? That can keep coming in. Maybe I'm wrong, but that is a lot of money that's sitting on the sideline, right? And it's been, Bitcoin at over $1 trillion valuation. That's a lot of money. That's bigger than the entire mining equity space, right? So that money sitting on the sidelines and not be going into equities, I think that is going to play out in 2025.
So, what is your 2025 thesis for base metals? If someone were to ask you why they should be rotating money out of a Bitcoin, notwithstanding the fact that you called that space a Ponzi, but why they should be rotating money out of that sector into something like base metals like copper, How would you answer that question?
Well, first of all, you can make a lot of money on a Ponzi scheme unless you're the last guy holding, right? There's a lot of truth to that, right? And I think many people, they're maybe drinking the bathwater a little, but I think
Mhm.
many people realize it, but they also know how much money can be made, right? And when will that happen? I think really the what happens on the first days of Trump's first days as president will have a significant impact on the overall direction of 2025. Right? I do believe that tariff wars would have an immediate bad impact on copper and base metals because there is a concern over the impacts in pushing the world's economies into recession. Right? But I think that that will change, quickly, maybe in the second half of the year or even the second quarter, right? When people come to the reality that you need supply chains, right? The bigger impact on tariffs isn't in cost, pushing people into recession or fighting profit margins. It's the impact on securing supply chains. And I think that narrative changes a lot of things, right? And I think that you could see the big spur in copper happen because somebody came out, right, and said the sky is falling. We don't have enough copper. This is a big problem. We're not going to meet our world energy transition numbers by any sense of the matter unless copper price goes up. It went up, right? It went up. A narrative can change, can drive metals prices, right? Now, when does that narrative take over is the question.
Well, let's back up a minute for the audience watching us. Why do we ultimately care about copper? Just think about that question for a minute. We live our lives, we go and eat and work and use our computers and use our phones, and we don't really think about what goes into the inputs of our everyday lives, right? Why are we sitting here talking about copper in a 30-minute conversation?
I think it's Rick Rule who says, well, the prices got to go up or the lights go off, right? So, I mean, that is the best analogy. The best analogy is that for our day to day lives, the transmission of low voltage power is by copper, almost exclusively, 99% of it, right? And so the turn on the lights, run your computers, right? Data centers, all these things. Without copper, you won't be able to do those things. Your quality of life. And I think that's probably one of the biggest impacts on the globalization of the planet is people became disconnected between their daily habits and what it actually meant, right? What does it mean to use a computer and have a cell phone and turn your lights on? What does that really mean, right? What does that really mean? Where is it coming from, right? And I think that we're coming into a world where that's breaking down and we're coming into the reality. Again, you see because of data centers, big tech companies with really big checkbooks, right? Going into looking to buy power, nuclear power plants. So like it's not an analogy or a
Well,
exaggeration,
do,
right?
do,
So
do you think critical minerals will be immune to tariffs, meaning that they won't be applied to critical minerals? I know Trump is thinking of implementing broad-based tariffs. There will be retaliatory broad-based tariffs on the U.S. if this were to happen. If copper and other base metals go up in price for trading because of these tariffs, that would raise the input prices of everything you just talked about.
I think if I was in the United States, I'd be like, oh, tariffs on everything. Oh, except for your raw materials
Yeah.
and certain critical pieces, et cetera. I don't think it's the US you need to be concerned about. I think it's the other side of the coin. Why would China do it? China would be like, really? Okay, you're going to put a tariff on me? I'm
Hmm.
not shipping you copper. Or there's going to be an export tariff, right? To export raw materials, right? Where I'm going to put a massive, and I am going to put Tesla out of business, right? I'm going to put your chip makers out of business, right? Because don't forget, this is not a game of chess where the other person doesn't make moves, right? There's both sides of the table get to make moves. And I think that is the bigger narrative that's going to happen in 2025. Even the head fake, right? Even just saying that there's going to be tariffs, right, is still spurring, we can't do it yet. So we got to secure our supply chains first. I think supply chains is going to be a bigger narrative, right?
That happened with antimony actually, and we saw what happened with the antimony price. It went up. I wonder if that's the trigger for higher prices in copper. Just China saying, "Look, we're going to limit the export of base metals, not just critical, not just certain critical metals like germanium and antimony, but just all base metals."
Absolutely. I think. I think that that is a reality that most people don't understand. Antimony, who cares, right? But it is a shot across the bow, right? Even an indication that we are considering, right? They haven't even, it's such a powerful weapon, right? It's weaponizing a commodity, right? That they haven't even hinted. They keep on, the old saying in China is hold a flower up front, but have a brick behind your back, right? They're holding the brick behind their back, and the flower, in many ways, is guys, hint, hint, look what happens with antimony, right? I think that that is something that most people, it's like going right over everybody's head because we don't get it, right? We don't, it's not something that as average people every day we have that connection to those supply chains because globalization took that away.
What is the mining sector doing to prepare for this trade war?
Well, we're doing our best we can to survive, right? I mean, because the equity markets have been very, very, very difficult, right? So having projects ready, I can only say what I know what the majors are doing.
Mm.
Unfortunately, they're not doing very much. They are just buying each other. They're saying we're leveraged to the price is going to go up and we're leveraged to it. And we're just consolidating production. And they're not willing to take the risk of developing projects yet. So, unfortunately, I do not think again, and I've said this many times, the industry itself is not the solution. It is not our responsibility. We are not doctors. It is not our responsibility to solve the production problem. Our responsibility is to increase value to our shareholders. And one of the ways to do that is through increased price of metals prices, right? So it's to take advantage of increased metals pricing, right? So I'm not saying that the major mining companies are doing the wrong thing, right? But there will be a need for highly developed projects,
Is
a
there
desperate one.
is there kind of a mismatch in priorities then? Is there kind of a incentive for the large companies to limit production such that the price remains high? We're talking about shareholder value here, right?
Yeah, I think what you're talking there requires an OPEC, right? And there's been
Yeah.
attempts at it, right?
Is there
And
an
there
OPEC
has
within,
definitely been
yeah, within copper mining?
no, no. There has been attempts at it, right? But there's also been attempts at cornering markets. You could argue that Glencore has had a significant influence on the price of zinc over the years, et cetera. But no, right? And any CEO would get shot if he said, "I am going to lower my returns, right, by
Mm.
reducing production to get a higher price." But what you do see, and I see some interesting plays, is maybe in the silver market where they're saying, if I believe in gold and silver, and I believe that it's a hedge to fiat currencies,
Hmm.
why am I selling my gold and selling it into US dollars? And I'm going to start accumulating my profit in my commodity. That might be more interesting, but I don't think it will be widespread.
What's next for Libero Copper? Well, first of all, tell us about your recent drill results, uh, and then we can talk about what's next. Again, you're based in South America, so you're
Colombia.
you're you're caught in this, yeah, Colombia. You're caught in this interesting geopolitical spectrum here. Colombia is a sphere of influence of the U.S., not exactly North America. But we'll talk about your drill result first.
Yeah. First of all, we are located in Colombia, which we've talked a lot about tariffs, et cetera, but Colombia is it has the highest status of an ally, right below NATO, right? So it is the same as Australia, Japan, et cetera, right? It's in terms of its allied status, which bodes well for us. But we just announced, last October, we were mobilizing back on the project, launching a 14,000-meter drill program. And yesterday, today we announced the first Monday, January 6th, we announced the first results of the first hole. And it was over 1,100 meters mineralized from top to bottom, right? And
Sure.
most times when you see drill hole results, you see them in terms of, in intersection, right? This was the whole hole, was about a 0.46% copper equivalent with some higher grade intervals in between. But what we talked about earlier, how does this play out? How does these scenarios play out? The world eventually is going to need some big scale, big copper projects. And so we want to be well positioned to be able to deliver on that. And that's one of the reasons why we're so excited about this first hole to be able to demonstrate the size and scale potential of the Mako deposit.
Your ultimate timeline. Can you give us a sense of your 2 year plan, 5 year plan?
You mentioned something well. There's been some geopolitical movement in Colombia over the last 2 years with its first leftist president, but I think you're seeing a shift back to the right and delivery by right politicians in South America. And so Petro has 2 years left, and I would expect, just like in Canada, there's going to be some swing back the opposite direction. So my number one goal is to be able to advance the project to a state where I can enter it on a silver platter to the upcoming government. That's the time to go. You need investment. We got a great project. Here it is. Let's start working on the permitting side. So my short-term goals over the next 2 years is the project has over 600 million tons, drive it over that billion-ton resource size. That's important because that provides the size and scale that major companies need to say, this is worth it, right? So that's number one for me, right? But going from 600 to a billion, it's very doable. And today's whole greatly increases our confidence to deliver. And then the next part is obviously getting into the engineering and design of a project so that you are ready when the government says, I need you. Now, I've actually done this in the past, right? Like there's been very few top 20 scale copper mines built over the last 20 years. I was part and started the construction of the first industrial scale mine in the history of Ecuador. That was the lessons learned. Timing this with government, right? And developing political will is critical for projects of this size. And so that is going to be a big part of what we're doing, right? But Macoa is now checking so many boxes that we're extremely excited.
Have you talked to investors or policymakers about how Trump's policies may or may not impact the ability of North American miners to acquire South American assets like yourself? Will there be barriers? Will it be easier? Do we know yet?
I don't. I think it's only the Canada that had that no foreign investment or no
Mm-hmm.
foreign government entity, whatever the rule is.
Mm-hmm.
Funny, I was in Dubai recently, and they literally asked, "Would this affect us? Would
Mm-hmm.
this impact us?" Right? Because although it was meant to stop China, but the truth is, look at the big one that it happened to was Solaris. CZ came in. They had to cancel it because of the regulation. And what did they do? They just re-domiciled to Switzerland. So another great policy that's just moving great companies outside of your country, right? So I don't think that is a smart policy, right? So I have less concern. And because Colombia is a major non-NATO ally of the United States, that helps a lot, right?
Yeah.
And even the anti-inflationary, which was actually a green energy stimulus bill, right? A part of it was the critical mineral supply component, supply component, percentage components of batteries, et cetera, had to come from US or from US allies.
Here's a chart of Libero Copper, your stock. Over the last 12 months, it's up roughly, it's done very well, 100%. What's your plan to add shareholder value in 2025?
Yeah, the biggest one for us right now is getting more eyeballs, demonstrating the project is moving forward consistently, putting out more and more drill results. We know we have results that are top 5 or 10 project in the world type results. I mean, it's in copper. So we know eventually I think it's building confidence. And we would see a major re-rate and major valuation change just getting our current we actually have 4 billion pounds of copper in a resource already at the project.
Mm-hmm.
Just changing that to a penny per pound in the ground or 2 pennies per pound in the ground is a big value increase from where we are today. So we are going to keep advancing the project, building confidence that this project is moving forward and demonstrating in the medium term that we can get over that billion-ton threshold. I think there's a lot of value that can be created.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Ian. Appreciate it. Where can we follow more news from Libero Copper?
Well, we have our liberocopper.com website, and our ticker is LBC.V. And always can, my email and my phone number is on the bottom of every press release. So more than happy to answer any questions.
Fantastic. Ian, good to talk to you again. Thanks for being back in 2025, and we'll follow up soon. Take care.
Thanks, David.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to follow Libero Copper. Link down below. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.